This is the second of two lectures. This one is about personnel, paperwork, and the things that we have to record keep. So I'm going to talk about what licensing wants because that's a huge part of record keeping, and then the record keeping and paperworking that you need just in general for running an ECE program, and then what you need to post as well. So this is very kind of detailed, but it's very specific to licensing because that's a big part of it. And there is more to it as far as record keeping and organized files, which does save daily time, daily stress, especially if we're inspected or accredited. It becomes more vital to have good files stored accurately and efficiently so that not only you can access them, but anybody in your program could access them as well, from administrative assistants to classroom staff as well. If licensing was to come and you were not available, would they be able to access some of those things? And you don't want all of your classroom staff to have access to your files. They should not have access to anybody else's personnel files, but they do, if you are in a very small program and you are the only director or manager and one of your staff members has the administration classes, because that's how it was for me before, then you will need to have that person have the ability to let licensing see them. They should not see anybody else's personnel files. They shouldn't see what other people are making, any other things like that, but they would know where they are. So records to be maintained at the facility, the best thing is that we have all of them right here. So if you go to the CDSS website, once again, and go community care licensing, it's licensing 311A, and that's the PDF. But there's child's records, personnel records, administration records, and then the things that need to be posted, and that's what we're going to be talking about. So child's records, personal rights, signed and dated by the parent, currently in file all the time. Also, that the parents really understand it and you understand what personnel rights. I know that this is becoming more of an issue with analysts, and I do not have a good answer for when it has been taken to maybe an extreme. I've heard from multiple people, situations like a child having sand thrown at them in the sandbox over an issue with a sand toy or making a castle. Do we want sand thrown? No. Does it happen with 3- and 4-year-olds? Yes. Should the staff be involved, stop it, and make sure that children are redirected and taken care of? Yes, and that's going to happen in 90% of the situations. Have analysts seen this and said that the personal rights of the children were being hurt because they got hit with sand? Yes, and then you are getting issues with licensing. That seems a bit much to me. That's a typical development that we would see within classrooms, and I think that licensing could hit us on what the staff do or do not do. If the staff is not taking care of it, if they don't see it, if they're not supervising it, if they're not redirecting carefully, if they're not speaking to the children in the right way, that would be something that I would expect to be hit on. But children engaging in developmentally appropriate behaviors that are less than ideal is something that we have in classrooms, and that's why we have high supervision numbers, and that's why we train ourselves so much. So it's really important that you know and the parents know about personal rights, because this is becoming something that licensing has, I've heard, been focusing on more and more. We also need to have the medicine issue, and we talked about this earlier, the right route, right time, all of the kind of 5 R's that have to go with medicine, and then you have all of the written paperwork that you need in order to administer albuterol, or even I would consider sunscreen part of that. You also need to make sure that their health checkups are well done, very easy to access within the health records, and then this also includes the immunizations, part of the law that we have as well. Then personnel records, so once again, other staff should not have access to this. It should just be management staff, but a big thing would be the TB test, keeping an eye on when those are due for all of your staff. They need to have current health screenings. They need to have a signed copy of the employee rights as well, and then they have to have their CPR and first aid access as well. So this is really what licensing wants, and one of my past students had a great idea. In each personnel file, there was the first part was literally just what licensing wanted. And then the second part was everything that she needed. So it didn't really make sense. Like if you were looking through it to have it this way for your own self. But for licensing, just for licensing, to flip through each file and see the 5 things that they need. And then everything else is the stuff that you need about handbooks and signing in and out and, you know, all the lesson plan, all of that stuff that you might have in a personnel file for your own self that's signed that they understand it. Licensing probably doesn't want to thumb through a lot of that in order to find the TB test. So if you make it easier for them to access within your files, you might have a happier analyst. Then administration records, sign in and out sheets are huge and a huge issue for us, and having parents buy into the idea that they actually have to sign in and out and why that's important. But we would need it for our state programs and our federal programs, and any kind of subsidy as well. Just in general, we also need it for who's in the building and who's not in the building. What is my supervision number? We also, and typically you keep those, I kept them for a year on site, and then I had a gigantic, then I had like a shed in the back, and I was not great about culling through the herd. I would just put them in there until I could no longer get in the shed, and then I would go to the very back and I would throw out things from like 10 years ago. I am not the best with the past. I do keep things for a very long time, which I think is a good idea. You know, maybe you don't need the sign in and out sheet from 2007, but you might need it from 2017. So keeping them, maybe not on site, but another place is a great idea. And then admissions, all the admissions paperwork that you need to have as well. And then you need to have rosters for each classroom, and then you need to have facility responsibility as well. That's a licensing form that you're also going to need about who is responsible for this facility. If you are gone, if somebody else is gone, kind of, it's almost our attempt at like a command structure, but it's specific for license. What needs to be posted in our facility, our license, our personal rights form, the menu, the schedule, and then the parents' right poster. And this is specific to licensing. In the staff break room, you typically have to have your EEOP, you need to have the workman's comp number, and I talked about that in the past lecture as well. There is a list very similar to this about what you need from the state for employee rights in order to kind of keep employees safe. But this is what licensing wants. Paperwork management, so you need to have everything for licensing very accessible. Analysts do not want to be waiting around, and that's why my students passed example about the personnel files being easy to access and everything licensing wants being at the beginning is great, but you also need to make sure that they can very easily see everything that's posted, and then the other forms that they are going to need from you about or want to access from you are either easy to see, like fire drills and things like that, or you have a book specifically for license. The faster you can get an analyst in and out and the more accommodating you seem will help you with the working relationship. Then typically you need some kind of system for businesses. You need to keep your taxes and all of those types of things. You also need to have teachers and staff, and then you also need to have paperwork for your families. So in business, the best thing to do is to have receipts, save all of your receipts all of the time, have them somewhat organized. So you have a January, February, March, April, whatever, monthly file folder, and you just put your receipts in by month. The big box full of receipts, and at the end of the year, you and your tax guy have to go, or tax woman have to go through an entire box where here's July, here's November. Like, that can be a little frustrating. Try to keep it a little bit organized, but keep everything. Like, literally keep everything that you have ever, like, you bought 5 things of sweet potato baby food for Thanksgiving, that goes in there as well. Then your budget, your revised budget, your actual budget, typically it's going to be on your computer, saved somewhere else, and then it's typically also printed out as well. You need to have all of your tax forms. You need to have all copies of checks, accounts, payments, deposits, and then you're going to have an electric and online system. But there's typically paper systems that you have as well. Most people like to look at and checks and accounts and things like that will be offline as well. I'm the PTO treasurer for my daughter's school, and by the end of the school year, which is 10 months, all of my record keeping is about 1.5 feet high, and then it goes to the school and it gets archived, and then I took a look at it, and I would guess that there's like 15 years of archives in there. But you need to keep it for at least 7 years when it comes to business. That's typically what is like the industry standard. But you need to have a system electronically. It's fairly easy. They kind of set it up for you. And then a system for how you keep budgets, taxes in a paper system so that you and the tax people at the end of the year can do this very easily. Then teachers and staff. So staff, you typically from them as far as paper, you need weekly lesson plans, you need a signed copy of policies and handbooks within their personnel files, you need licensing personnel files per program as well. And then you also need to manage their dates of training. So when did they do CPR? When did they do child abuse? When did they do something that's specific to your agency or organization? It needs to remain current. So you keeping an eye on it is really important. I wouldn't allow the staff, especially a large group of people, they might not all of them keep on track of everything. Staff, they need to have policies and handbooks that they've signed. You've kept a copy, and then they have a copy as well. They need training forms. They need a lot of classroom forms, and this is why a Google site with a classroom computer will take a lot of this out of you. Sign in and out sheets, you just email it to them. Health forms, field trips, lesson plans, things that reoccur all the time, they just have access to. Then the posted forms in classrooms, their bulletin boards, making sure that when they change their bulletin boards, they don't take off the really important licensing things, that they know there are certain things that always have to be on a bulletin board, and then they have creative freedom to add to it. There's just the negotiables and the not negotiables. Then there's checklists for safety maintenance or for your janitor, and then also for your kitchen as well. I also have most programs also have a library of ideas. And then they also have handbooks that remain in the classroom, or training forms that remain in the classroom. So if something was to happen, you have access to a binder to show you an emergency route, or if there's an active shooter, these are the policies, in addition to just how to do a roster. So typically it's like a handbook for the classroom, and those are also there as well. So a lot of paperwork has to do with our staff. Then families. The first thing is just information for walk-ins or interesting parties. You have a brochure, you have a business card, you have a handout, a flyer, something with the next step so that they can enroll in your program. And if you're state subsidized, who they need to call or what they need to do in order to do that. And I typically, a flyer is nice. Like I walked into a Head Start one time and they were like, oh, well, just call blah, blah, blah. And I was like, okay, what's their number? Oh, it's on the website. And I just kind of was like, well, like, who do I call? Like, what's the name? So I just go to this website, and they're like, yeah. And then I just feel like even if we're part of a larger organization, oh, you can call this number, or here's the website, or something that I can walk away with that I can see will help me actually enroll in the program. Then an application for an enrollment process. Typically, I would give a flyer and the application if I was currently trying to enroll. I want to keep my numbers up. That's how I keep the lights on in my business. And then we also need to have printed handbooks, and we need to have printed policies, typically a lot of them at a time, which is a cost. So some smaller programs print them from the computer as they need them. The larger programs have larger print orders that they do of an entire handbook, and then of many of the policies. So as families enter, they can just give it to them, have them sign it, and put it in their file. You also need to have your sign in and out sheets daily, and you typically have to have a roster daily as well. And then your emergency contacts are updated regularly. I think I shared in past lectures about trying to do it quarterly after having a really bad experience with a fire where we needed to close down the center and not being able to get a hold of a family, but just making sure that they are up. The parents look it over and update it, and then change it as needed if their friend has moved away. And this was especially a big part of our military community. We do move a lot, families move a lot, deploy a lot. So if dad is deployed, then we need to have probably more emergency contacts who's looked at, and we know that those people are actually in the state and haven't relocated to Yuma, Arizona for the military. So digital is great. You keep your records of enrollment. It tracks children. It assists with HR. We have classroom information. Then there's online banking. Then there's HR systems that track employment, payroll, vacation time. So if you have the opportunity to buy a system or to be part of a system that can digitally handle and track some of these, then you should. An example is ProCare software. right wheel, HR systems like ADP and APS, you're probably familiar with those. Those are the industry standards as far as HR systems, and they're great because it does payroll and vacation time, which is a legal requirement. So many of you probably have better ones or newer ones or great ones or exploring new things. So please let us know if you have any awesome suggestions. And then paper, a lot of paper copies are required for certain agencies. They need to see an actual sign in and out sheet. And I do print out certain things. It is a second layer of accountability. So yes, I have filed my tax forms electronically with the state and the federal government, but for the PTO, I always print it out as well. And then I typically give it to another person, another officer as well. So, or it's in a shared area. I might need to have my daily hands on it, but the printed copy also somebody else has access to as well. And then most of us are always going to have signed copies, and maybe this can be PDFs that we keep somewhere on our computer, and that's probably what we're headed towards. But a lot of programs still have signed copies in a file as well, procedures, policies, handbooks. Other ways to do this that I love, so Tom Copeland, I think I've talked about him before, but he is a FCC guru. If I was to name one person who has written lots of books and supports FCC providers, it would be Tom Copeland. So he has his own blog. He posts regularly with like great information. Even if you're not FCC and you want to know about taxes or ebooks or record keeping calendars, you go, his website and his blog has a lot of information, and he talks a lot about personnel issue and business issues. He has a lot of free resources, and then he has a lot of ebooks. I think I have 4 of his ebooks that I've bought myself. I think they're $5 to $7. It is a great resource for you. I would highly suggest if you're FCC or you're just interested in business and personnel to check him out. He also updates with a lot of pertinent and recent info about laws. He typically keeps it fairly broad. Because we're federal, like we have state and federal issues, so a lot of it's the federal issues. Another one that I like is this book called Effectively Managing Human Service Organizations by Ralph Brody. So that's Effectively Managing Human Services Organizations. A professor at Cal State teaches from this. It's great. It goes about supervisory relationships. It talks a lot about expenses and taxes, working with boards, and then time management, delegation, all that type of stuff. It's fantastic. I bought it on Amazon, 3rd edition. It's a little bit old, but I think I bought it for $4. It's a fantastic book though. So if you are stressed at the end of this lecture and you said, oh my God, how am I ever going to keep track of it? Check out Tom Copeland, check out people outside of our industry who are doing management and doing budgeting and record keeping. That type of principle transcends the fact that we work with children. Yes, we probably have a lot more paperwork, but so do a lot of industries as well. There are things in each industry that people have to keep track of. So this is Tom Copeland. He actually has some videos both on his blog and also he has some YouTube videos. So in this one, it's like tax keeping tips. So when are children present, and what are the percentages when it goes to taxes. So he's a fairly accessible person as well. So in conclusion, you have to have records. It's a non-negotiable in any job, not just childcare. Any job, you have to have records. You are human adults, you probably have records that you keep at home. So just think at your job, you're going to have the same kind and type of records just for the people, which is your staff, your children, and your families, in addition to yourself. So a lot of agencies, though, require this, and they require complete records. So keeping an eye on licensing and your budget, just the financial aspect, are the 2 big areas that you need to focus on, and you need to understand what is going on. So you need to go out and do your due diligence if you're opening a center or you're going into a center. But you talk with people and you explore resources and books that can support you in keeping all of the records that you need to in as efficient a manner as is possible. All right, that is it for this week. Thank you so much. I'll see you guys online.